If it's Wednesday, it is debate night in America, the first one of the campaign season. 8 Republican presidential candidates poised to face off in battleground Wisconsin, and a chance to change the dynamic in the race against frontrunner Donald Trump, who's not showing up. Plus, NBC News confirms Trump's plans to surrender in Atlanta tomorrow night as more of the former president's 18 co-defendants are slowly but surely turning themselves in today, including his attorney, Rudy Giuliani. And the breaking news we've been working on for the last couple of hours, officials are trying to confirm Russian state media claims that Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner mercenary chief who orchestrated an armed uprising against President Putin, has been killed in a reported plane crash just outside of Moscow. Hello there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd in Washington, and what could very well be the most consequential day of the Republican presidential primary so far, one way or another. With just a few hours until the first debate, this primary has been dominated by the former president and an unwillingness by most top candidates to tackle him head on. If the dynamic inside the Republican race for president is going to change, we're going to start to find that out tonight. And if it isn't going to change, we'll find that out tonight as well. So it's consequential in either outcome, in either scenario. A few hours from now, 8 candidates, we think, will take the debate stage in Milwaukee, where they will have 2 hours to make their case to Republican primary voters and Trump voters. And they'll do it without Trump on stage. The race's 4 times indicted frontrunner is skipping tonight, citing his commanding lead as a reason he doesn't need to show up. And for what it's worth, it is not the first time a frontrunner has skipped a first debate. That's the strategy that you do when you're up by more than 20 points in the polls. And Trump is up by more than that. But even without Trump, every flavor of this current Republican Party is going to be present on the stage. You'll have some Trump acolytes, and there's also some Trump critics. You'll have some establishment Republicans and a couple of D.C. outsiders, the interventionist foreign policy wing and the isolationist wing. But if you want a window in tonight's contest, look at what Republican primary voters want to see and hear from this field. And what better group of Republicans best represent those voters than likely Iowa caucus goers? They're not your mainstream Republican primary voters, but they're the single most important voting group right now because they're first. Ahead of tonight's debate, we have some brand new numbers from our NBC News Des Moines Register Mediacom poll on what would make Republican caucus goers more likely or less likely to support a candidate. The most popular positions are on screen right now. You've heard this: using the military to secure the border, easily the top one there, fighting the left's quote-unquote woke agenda, banning gender-affirming care, banning abortions after 15 weeks. So you see there, this is probably what you're going to hear a lot of, particularly the first 2. You're going to hear that from all the candidates. And, of course, another also popular, taking on the left's quote woke agenda and so forth. And here's what they don't want to hear. Only about a third say that they would be more likely to support a candidate who wants to continue military aid to Ukraine or to privatize Social Security. I expect the Ukraine issue to actually be a robust debate tonight. I'm not sure how much Social Security we're going to hear tonight. We shall see. But then here's the big one. This is the question of whether you should aggressively criticize Donald Trump for his alleged criminal actions. They don't want to see it. Just 16% say that it would somehow make them more likely to support a candidate. So that's the Chris Christie constituency, for better or for worse. Now, that said, voters tell us they don't like negative ads, but that hasn't stopped campaigns from using negative ads. However, we do think they won't be too hard on Trump tonight. So let's take a look at the net favorability rate. Heading into tonight's debate, Republicans on stage know full well the consequences of attacking the former president. Among those likely Republican Iowa caucus goers, the least popular candidates in Milwaukee are the ones who have loudly and repeatedly attacked Trump for his actions surrounding the 2020 election. I think we had that up there before. But obviously, the single most unpopular person, frankly, left and right, is Chris Christie. The left doesn't trust him because he was such a Trump sycophant before, and the right doesn't like him because he attacks him so much. But it's a conundrum that all the top rivals have to do. How do you take on the front runner if the bulk of voters don't want to hear you criticize him? Can his voters be convinced to support someone else? Well, like I said, tonight might be the field's best chance to shift the dynamic of this race. And if they can or won't, this primary may be over before it has actually begun. So joining me now from inside the spin room in Milwaukee is Ali Vitale. So, Ali, let's start with I think the single most important thing to know right now. Is it 7 candidates or 8?
Yeah, I think that's an open question for about another hour, Chuck. My sources with the Burgum campaign say he went to the doctor. That's what he told me just now, too. He went from the spin room to the doctor's office. But it may not matter what the doctor says either way, because listen to this part of an interview I did with Burgum where he says it might not be doctor's orders, but doctor's suggestions, and he could debate anyway. Watch. Can you stand for 2 hours?
Well, this one thing we'll find out, but I just did the walkthrough. They've got strong podiums, and they've got them bolted to the floor, so hopefully that'll provide the support I need. If I have to stand on one leg for 2 hours to fulfill this mission of improving every American life, I'm happy to do it. There's all kinds of people that make bigger sacrifices than that.
So you're either standing or you're not debating?
Exactly.
And look, it kind of comes back around, Chuck, to what you were talking about in terms of not criticizing Trump. What I said after that interview with Burgum was you're willing to stand for 2 hours on one leg. At one point, he got emotional about everything it's taken for him to get on the stage. And I say, what does it tell you that you are willing to do all of that and Trump is just skipping out? And he completely dodged. He just said every candidate gets to make their own decision. It's moments like that that just remind you Trump still controls this stage, whether or not he's here or whether or not he's somewhere else.
Yeah, it is the biggest head scratcher. I've never seen a campaign where candidates refuse to go after fellow candidates in the race. I mean, it is truly something that we haven't seen. So we know that Donald Trump is going to be counter-programming. Explain what you've seen of the presence of the Trump campaign on the ground, though. We're aware of the interview. I'm curious, what have they been doing on the ground there in Milwaukee?
Yeah, it just sort of feels like trolling, honestly, at a high level, using elected officials to do so. The fact that they are having dinners with reporters to try to remind them of all of the flaws in the DeSantis candidacy, the fact that they've got elected officials here from Marjorie Taylor Greene to Byron Donald, a member of the Florida delegation from DeSantis's own state. All of that is meant to underscore the fact that Trump still reigns supreme here. And it sort of reminds me of what he did at the Iowa State Fair, flying a plane overhead that said, "Be likable, Ron." They just sent in the last hour or so a bingo card meant to troll DeSantis. It's the classic Trump strategy, trying to get under his skin and trying to needle at their rivals. I think that's the thing that differentiates DeSantis from the rest of the stage. DeSantis allies have been clear with me today. They know that their guy has a target on his back and that he's going to be taking incoming from everyone on the stage. But what makes him different is he's also taking incoming from the guy not on the stage.
Yeah.
Trump is barely attacking anyone who isn't named DeSantis. Sure, he'll swipe at Christie or Hutchinson, but not really, because he knows they're not really registering in the polls. His eyes are trained on DeSantis, and I think for everyone else on the stage, it's a question of can they help aid DeSantis's fall so that they can take second place? Because really, that's what this debate is. It's just a competition for second. It's
a fascinating dynamic. On the one hand, Ron DeSantis should feel good that everybody's coming after him. And it's an opportunity. I think we're all wondering, can he take advantage of that opportunity? Ali Vitale on the ground for us. Ali, thank you. Speaking of Ron DeSantis, joining me from outside the debate hall is Ken Cuccinelli. He's the founder of the Never Back Down Super PAC, which, of course, is supporting the Ron DeSantis presidential bid. They usually do a lot of the work that puts a lot of the events together that Governor DeSantis shows up at. Mr. Cuccinelli, always good to hear from you.
Thanks, Chuck. Good to be with you.
Let me start with the infamous debate memo. I don't want to get into litigating whether it should have been made public or not, but it has been made public. And I assume you haven't changed your mind at what he should try to accomplish tonight. So one of the decisions you say in this memo is to defend Donald Trump in absentia in response to a Chris Christie attack. Why do you believe that's an important thing for your candidate to do?
Yeah, so since he got in the race, Governor DeSantis has distinguished himself from Trump on issues, whether it's COVID, the wall, economy, Fauci, personnel. It's a long list. And that's an appropriate way to make the distinction, to make the attack. The name calling that Trump inspires and undertakes which we would anticipate, you're referencing there, would be a response, I think raises and elevates the level of the debate overall. I think if Ron DeSantis is able to do that, he demonstrates how presidential he already is. He's the most successful conservative chief executive governor in our lifetimes. Mark Levin has said things like that. He's a tough goal, standard to measure against. And I think that he measures up well. And as Ali just said, it's really Ron DeSantis and everybody else tonight. And he gets to introduce himself for the first time to most Americans without a filter of you and me talking about this or that. They get to see him for himself. And he has always risen to those occasions.
What's your sense of how important, I am of two minds on this as a first debate. Traditionally, first debates aren't that important. Traditionally, a front runner skips a first debate. Also not surprising. Obviously, this is different because we have a former president running. We haven't had that in our lifetimes, right? Something like that.
Right.
And of course, all the attention the arraignments get. Do you view this debate as make or break as others are writing it?
Oh, no. Chuck, this is a great introduction opportunity for, I've campaigned in a state, as you know, you've interviewed me before in Virginia, and there we would say Labor Day is sort of the beginning of the campaign as traditionally in a state. This is sort of the Labor Day of the presidential race. This is the first time most people will pay attention. All of us paying attention before, we've been building, talking to over 1.5 million people at doors at Never Back Down on behalf of Governor DeSantis. But this is really when people start to tune in, and that's when the movement starts to matter. There was a poll out recently that showed over 50% of people who, when asked who do you support in the race, still say, yes, they have an answer, but they're ready to move from that person. Over 50%. Only 40% who even have a candidate, whether that's DeSantis, Trump, or someone else, are ready to stick with their candidate. So it's very early in this process. Governor DeSantis gets to introduce himself as the singular leader against the woke left, the only veteran running. His tax and debt record are second to none. All things that matter to making a regular American's lives better as president, when he can cast that vision forward. And looking forward is a big difference than the other guy not on the stage, Trump, who just loves to look backwards.
One of the other things in the memo was hammer Vivek Ramaswamy. Well, you're not the only campaign apparatus that thinks he should be hammered, he's suddenly being treated like an IPO stock. Well, you better hit him now before he continues to grow. Why do you think Ramaswamy's finding a moment?
Well, he's young and has energy, but he's been flip-flopping on so many issues, whether it's aid to Israel or decriminalization of drugs or, critically for Iowa, the death tax at 59%. And his defenses of this stuff are just falling flat. And when you have, a left-wing media outlet getting backed up by a Megyn Kelly about Vivek's flip-flops, there's something very real to that. And he's a fake, Vivek the fake. And it's better that people know that early and focus on the two-person race this is in the Republican nomination.
If one of these candidates gets a bounce out of this debate, is that a way to measure this debate as a success or not?
I don't know about that. I think that the success for DeSantis is more building on the foundation that already exists for him. He has incredibly high name ID, the highest favorables in the Republican side, but letting people know the depth of his accomplishment that matters to Floridians' lives and as president would matter to every American's lives is really the measure of success. If he gets to make those points tonight, this is going to be a win for him to build and build and build as we turn to the voting in Iowa and New Hampshire and beyond.
Ken Cuccinelli, head of the DeSantis supporting super PAC Never Back Down. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective with us. Thank you, sir. All right, joining me now is Katon Dawson. He's a former state party chair himself, South Carolina Republican Party he's been chair of. He is backing Nikki Haley's presidential campaign and is officially on the ground there, stumping for her. Mr. Dawson, good to see you.
Good to see you, Chuck.
So let me start with tonight's debate. It's a first debate, but it's unlike any first debate we've had. So What's your sense of how significant you think tonight is versus the hype machine?
Chuck, there are a couple of things going on the ground here. You and I have been to a lot of debates. I ran one in South Carolina in 2008. And it was the first one. It was the first debate in the South. So they're important. I think there's a couple of lessons learned here. I get that some front runners have not debated in the past. Donald Trump has done a disservice to the Republican Party for two reasons. First of all, he should be at this debate. Second of all, to Republicans to take a look, he just gave Joe Biden a pass not to debate our nominee. I think that's an important fact. That
you think that's the biggest?
You
think this is going to make it easier for Biden to say, I'm not debating the Republican nominee? If he didn't do it, I didn't have to. Okay.
Absolutely, Chuck, because Donald Trump just did it. And there's 8 qualified candidates, one of them that I'm supporting, that really should have had a chance to talk about the policies and the personalities, but they missed that. There'll be another debate, but I think this one bites Republicans like myself who want to be competitive next November,
right?
And having a chance to go at the incumbent president.
Let me ask you about the November electability issue. Why do you think it is not an issue for Republican primary voters? We asked it in our own Des Moines Register poll. When you and this is a traditional thing with Republican voters. Democratic voters are willing to talk electability about in their primaries more so, at least recently, than Republican voters. And if you can't make the electability argument against Trump, there's not another good argument, is there?
Well, it is true in Republican politics. When you ask, is it more important to you, your values, your feelings, and your opinions, than it is electability, they'll pick over electability. Right now, this is a little different scenario. We've got 8 qualified candidates that have hit the stage here in Milwaukee that are going to talk about whether we want to continue to go on the path that we're on with Joe Biden or Donald Trump as president, or do we want to look to a next generation of Republicans? It's going to be the base of the Republican Party that's going to elect him. You're correct. Donald Trump's got about a 42% hold on it. And if you do the math, that's about 58% of us that aren't voting for him yet. So there's an opening there, but we got 8 folks going after the 58. I'm for the one very different person on that stage tonight, which is probably one of the most courageous people I know, which is a woman, Nikki Haley, the only person out of 328 million people in America to sign up and run for president. Not only that, she signed up as the only person first to run against Donald Trump. Pretty courageous, pretty different. Governor of South Carolina. I just listened to Ken, and I appreciate that we have people that are for all of our candidates. But underestimating Nikki Haley tonight will be a mistake for some of these other gentlemen that she'll be debating.
What's a successful night look like? Do you want a lot more foreign policy? If it's a heavier foreign policy night, does that give her more opportunities? Is there a specific way you're looking for her to showcase herself tonight?
Chuck, I remember when I found Nikki Haley giving out donuts in the school line running for the State House in South Carolina and not thinking she could win. Underestimating her is what's going to happen tonight. Certainly her foreign policy chops of a person who certainly stood strong with our allies who were with us in the UN and against our enemies, which China, Russia, and the next. So I think her foreign policy chops and the fact that she was governor of the state of South Carolina. And Chuck, you've been on the ground in South Carolina 20 years ago. You remember how tough it is to win a race there. You were there.
Right.
And Nikki Haley came through one and won 2 of them. So I don't know what the boys are going to throw at her tonight, but I guarantee you she can catch it and throw it back.
But what's interesting is I remember her when she was the outsider. Now she's seen as more establishment. Is that hurting her candidacy a little bit, that she doesn't get to be the outsider compared to the other outsiders?
That's a great point, Chuck. Nikki Haley never has been one of the good old boys, for sure.
Right.
And I think you got to watch her performance tonight. She's a cool debater. Right now, she gets to introduce herself to the rest of the Republican nation. Nikki's been spending a lot of time in the early 3 states, raising money and putting together a campaign to look for successfulness. And she was give her credit. She was the first one to step up against and take Trump's on. And let's just see how it turns out tonight. Tonight, a little uneventful. I'm not looking for a really big audience tonight, Chuck.
Okay.
I do think that the hardcore base is going to be paying attention, but the president's jumped in the middle of it. We know that.
Right.
I mean, he's pretty smart. He's missing. He's going to be indicted tomorrow. We're going to run on You Tell Me, Chuck. We got about 4 hours worth of news before it changes on the next indictment. Is that about right?
I know.
So we're going to do the best we can, and I appreciate you.
He does seem to use bad news and turn them into good events for himself. Katon Dawson, who is supporting Nikki Haley today and throughout the campaign, but on the ground for her tonight. Thanks very much.
Always, Chuck. Thank you.
And don't forget to tune in tonight for the Meet the Press special. We'll have debate analysis without all the crazy spinning that you might get in some places. We're just going to tell you what actually happened. We're going to do crazy things like fact checks, all sorts of stuff. Get reactions from the campaign. It's a post-debate show for true political junkies and people who just want to know what happened and why it happened. 11 p.m. Eastern, right here on NBC News Now. No place else to hang out. Up next, what we know and don't know about the plane that crashed outside of Moscow that may or may not have had one of Putin's top rivals on board. All of that is according to Russian state media. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We've been following the stunning breaking news out of Russia this afternoon as Russia's air transport agency is claiming that Wagner Group chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was listed as a passenger in a plane that crashed today. Russian officials say all 10 people on board that aircraft died in the crash. NBC News has not been able to independently verify reports of Prigozhin's presence on the plane. This video appears to show the fiery wreckage of the plane after it crashed, and it bears the same registration number as the plane linked to Prigozhin. The crash comes after Prigozhin launched a short-lived coup attempt against the Russian leader Vladimir Putin earlier this summer, though whether it was against Putin or the military is up for debate. The CIA has declined to comment. The White House says President Biden has been briefed on the reported plane crash. And we actually heard from the president during his vacation stay in Lake Tahoe just a few moments ago.
I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised.
Do you believe?
There's not much that happens when Russia is Putin not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
We shouldn't forget what Secretary of State Antony Blinken said to my pal Andrea Mitchell about the potential consequences for the mercenary chief during the Aspen Festival last month.
You know, if I were Mr. Prigozhin, I would remain very concerned. NATO has an open door policy. Russia has an open windows policy. And he needs to be very focused on that.
So what do we know and what are we still waiting to find out? Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, is on the beat now as well. And I also have with us former U.S. Ambassador to Russia and current NBC News foreign affairs analyst Mike McFaul. Richard, let me start with you. We're all being extraordinarily careful. So what do we know? And we know there's a second plane that people have talked about, also registered to the Wagner Group, that has landed safely. What information do you feel like you have that's fact?
Well, all we have as fact is that the Russians are claiming that Prigozhin was listed on the manifest.
All right. Richard, I don't know if you hear me. We lost your audio, so we're going to get that corrected here in a second. Let me go to Mike McFaul. And Mike, obviously, you've got unverified channels that you're able to tap into at times. Let's start with the basics. Do we believe Prigozhin's dead?
Chuck, to the best of my knowledge, yes, it appears that he's dead. We need to remind everybody that he had a second plane. That second plane has landed in Moscow now. Various telegram channels of Russian control, operated by Russians in Moscow, are saying he's probably on that plane. So just by way of context, we don't know for sure. But I would say the reporting I'm seeing overwhelmingly said that he died in that crash. And let's call it for what it is.
Right.
It doesn't appear to be a crash. It appears that there was either an explosion on the plane or it was shot down.
Right.
And that, I think, has happened. So it looks like the Russian government allegedly assassinated Yevgeny Prigozhin. And I just added allegedly there because I also want us to be careful that we don't know exactly if Putin was the one that ordered this assassination. And we'll probably never know, Chuck, because he doesn't want us to know exactly when these kinds of things happen.
Let me bring Richard back. Richard, I think we have your audio now free and clear. Let's go back to what do we feel like we know and what do we think we'll be able to find out and confirm independently?
Well, what we can confirm independently might be very difficult. Reporting in Russia right now is extraordinarily complicated. Since the war in Ukraine has begun, the Russians have imposed extraordinary limitations on the ability of reporters to operate in that country. There are journalists in jail in Russia right now. But the Russians, according to their different state media organizations and state institutions, including the Civil Aviation Authority, have laid out a pretty clear picture. They say that this plane, a corporate jet, registered to Prigozhin, to the Wagner Group, was leaving from Moscow on its way to St. Petersburg. That about 30 minutes into the flight, traveling at about 26,000 feet, suddenly it failed, and it failed catastrophically. And there is a video of this aircraft plummeting from the sky, falling like a stone in a way that does not suggest that anything normal or natural happened. It is twisting and spinning as it falls out of the sky and then crashes into the ground, into a fiery fireball because it is still full of fuel. So according to the Russians, he was manifested on this plane, and that the plane went down, and that there was a second plane in this convoy also carrying Wagner personnel, and that plane made it. So some Prigozhin supporters, and there are quite a few of them online, he became something of a hero when he launched this mutiny against the Kremlin. People who hated Vladimir Putin, who thought that Prigozhin was doing the right thing, calling out the crooks, calling out the criminals, challenging them on their own turf. They are still hopeful that maybe that he's on the second plane. That wouldn't put him out of danger if the Russians were trying to kill him, or that it's all a ruse, that he maybe registered his name on the plane, or that somebody else on the plane was using the name Yevgeny Prigozhin in an attempt to confuse the authorities. But that's all speculation. We know that this plane has crashed. We know that it was unsurvivable, and we know that the Russians say he was on it, and everything about it is incredibly suspicious. The way it went out, it fell down, that it was 2 months to the day since the uprising, since we know that Vladimir Putin pardoned Yevgeny Prigozhin in this very bizarre, also not very credible deal, that after Prigozhin marched his Wagner troops up toward Moscow and was not meeting much resistance, Prigozhin stopped and was suddenly offered this sweetheart deal to be pardoned and take his fighters to Belarus so that they could train a friendly allied government in counterterrorism tactics and commando tactics. That was allegedly the deal, but most people believed it was just a matter of time before Putin would get his revenge, that Putin needed a little bit of time to figure out who else was involved and sort out Prigozhin's business empire, understand them better, try and take it over before eliminating this rival.
Mike McFaul, the part that I'm struggling to believe here is the idea that Prigozhin was in Moscow. That doesn't seem like to be the smartest location to be hanging out, given the situation he created for himself. Are you surprised that he was living in Russia?
Yes. In a couple of respects. And I'm glad you're asking this, Chuck, because now that we know he's been killed, we've all jumped to the conclusion that it was a matter of time. I said that too many times. But there is a lot of weird things that happened between the mutiny and today. He cut a deal. Why did he cut a deal? Then he went to Belarus. Everything seemed fine. Then he was in St. Petersburg right next to President Putin when President Putin was holding a summit with African leaders, and he had his own kind of bilats, on the sidelines of that summit, and they were all going over to see Mr. Prigozhin. Why didn't they arrest him then? Why didn't they put a bullet in his head then? If this was all such a fait accompli, it was just a matter of time. Why did they have to do something so dramatic that we're all watching? Why didn't they arrest him? So there's a lot of strange questions here. Obviously, Prigozhin was lulled into believing that he and Putin were good. And otherwise he wouldn't have been doing all of those things. It sounds like he miscalculated, but there's a lot I want to know, including, was Putin the guy behind this alleged assassination attempt?
Well, one more. Let me throw something more into the timeline here. Yesterday, we get that video of Prigozhin in Africa. This morning, one of the generals he worked with was officially sort of removed from their job. And all of a sudden, a few hours later, this plane crashes or in a fiery ball. I mean, it's hard to see that any of that stuff isn't it can't be coincidental.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First, to the point of why he let him run around for a while and then maybe killed him. And I just want to keep emphasizing, I do not know that Vladimir Putin ordered the assassination of Prigozhin. That hasn't been confirmed. It probably never will be. But just for a minute, let's assume that's true. I think he let this go on because he wanted to use this moment to find out who were these traitors inside his government. Remember what Richard said. Richard said that Prigozhin was popular. I think that's very important for Americans to understand.
He could be a martyr, right?
He's inside Russia with the soldiers. He's a thug. He's a criminal. He's a terrorist. I have no, I'm glad to see him off the field. And believe me, Ukrainians are too. But within the armed forces, within the Russians, you were just showing some footage from Rostov when he's leaving. People are getting selfies with him. That made it more difficult for Putin to take him out right away. And I'm not convinced that those problems are over just because this has happened today.
Richard, what does this mean for these African countries that the Wagner Group has become their essentially mercenary force?
So you mentioned it just in your conversation right now. For the last several months, Putin has spent a lot of time focusing on Africa. He had this Africa summit. He was talking about Africa just the other day at the BRIC summit. So since this uprising, this mutiny happened, and in a way, Vladimir Putin subcontracted out Africa to the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group was the forward operations arm of the Kremlin, military and political, in Africa. I saw it myself in the Central African Republic. The embassy there was Wagner. It was Wagner that was on patrol in the streets. I asked the government about it. I asked the president. He said, well, we needed security protection. We wanted Russian security protection, and they sent Wagner, and that's up to Moscow to send whoever they want to. So after this mutiny, we saw Putin focusing a lot on Russia, trying to reestablish those relationships, trying to make them more official, make them more officially part of the Kremlin and not subcontracted out to Wagner. And it seems that perhaps...
Oh, man. Well, Richard, you're not going to like this. We lost your audio again, and now you've just frozen on camera as well. Very quickly, Mike McFaul guarantees we're going to hear from the rest of the Republican candidates about where they stand on Putin tonight. As somebody just texted me, this is Putin, an odd way for Putin to ensure he gets into the debate questions tonight.
Yeah, and it's too bad that one of those presidential candidates won't be there to talk about it, the one who has the closest relationship to Mr. Putin. That said, I hope that somebody will ask him eventually what he thinks as well.
And it'll be interesting to see how everybody else dances around this tonight. Mike McFaul, Richard Engel, I know we're trying to, always tough sometimes, tech on the road. Thank you both. Coming up, former President Trump now expected to surrender to Fulton County authorities tomorrow afternoon, just in time for the 6:30 and 7 o'clock newscasts is when he wants to time his arraignment. Anything he can do to step on any post-debate spin. We're live in Atlanta with the latest in that case. and some new developments tied to a key witness in the special counsel's classified documents case, the Florida federal case against Mr. Trump. That's ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We turn now to Fulton County, Georgia, where there has been a flurry of activity as defendants in Fani Willis's case slowly start to turn themselves in. It's also where we expect to see Donald Trump tomorrow evening. He is timing his arraignment for around 6 o'clock hour. He is still somebody that thinks the 6:30 evening news is something to time events for, and that's what he's doing. So far, 9 of the 19 defendants have been booked, and several others have reached bond agreements with the district attorney's team. Among those is Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who traveled to Georgia today, where his bond was set at $150,000, and he was then booked at the Fulton County Jail. Here's what Giuliani had to say this morning as he left his New York City apartment.
I'm going to Fulton County to comply with the law, which I always do. I don't know if I plead today, but if I do, I plead not guilty. And I get photographed. Isn't that nice? A mugshot for the man who probably put the worst criminals of the 20th century in jail.
Joining me now from outside that Fulton County jail is Vaughn Hilliard. And Vaughn, I know you got into a spirited discussion there with Rudy Giuliani as he sort of struggles to deal with his legal problems. We know he's got financial problems now because his client doesn't pay some of the bills there. What have you seen today, and how combative was Rudy?
Right. I think it's, spirited was one way to put it. I think that happens when it's 96 degrees and you have, maybe actually 70 or 80 cameras and reporters and others and protesters around you. And you've got the former mayor of New York who literally left his a formal surrender and booking and walked outside of the jail, which this is the exit of, and stood right here. And really, it took a few questions, yet was able to get one very specific one to him. And I'll let you listen to the exchange. And to preface it, the reason it was asked was because 1 month ago in a filing here in Georgia, Rudy Giuliani chose not to contest the fact that he had made false statements about Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss as two Fulton County workers, and the allegations that he had made, the accusations he had made, that they had engaged in voter fraud. He chose not to contest those claims of voter fraud. Take a listen to the attempt to ask him about that and what it could mean for this case and these charges of making false statements. Take a listen.
I entered into a stipulation for the purposes of that case to move on. I specifically says I do not in any way admit the truth of those allegations. Those allegations are totally false.
You did not contest that you made fraudulent claims about the 2020 election, though, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely wrong, and you're lying, as you often do. If you read it, it says it was only for the purposes of that case, and it was not an admission.
You had the opportunity to refute it, though, Mr. Mayor.
We gotta go. So he says that it's not an admission, and in that filing, he says that it is specific to that case, to Giuliani's defense. But this is the complicating part, because the district attorney in her indictment made the direct allegation that he knowingly made false statements in the aftermath of the 2020 election.
Right.
And in the one case that has gone to court so far, this defamation case, he chose not to contest the fact that he made false statements.
Very quickly, Vaughn, there's a couple of people that still haven't made it there. Obviously, we'll have Donald Trump tomorrow. But Mark Meadows, and he's trying to get a suit heard in court before the Friday deadline. What more can you explain about that?
Right. The district attorney's deadline to put to a judge her response to Mark Meadows' request to have his essentially booking deadline, instead of being at this Friday, go into next week, has been submitted by the district attorney's office. Now the judge will rule whether Meadows must appear here in Atlanta by Friday or not. Mark Meadows is making the case that his case should be heard in federal court, and that he says with a hearing slated for next week, he should not have to appear and formally surrender and go through the booking process until it's determined whether a federal court will hear it instead of a state one here in Georgia.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard in Fulton County for us. Vaughn, we're going to miss you in Iowa tonight, but that's all right. That's also a big story down there as well. Good to see you, my friend. Thank you. Let me turn down to a few more legal developments facing Trump. This one out of Florida. What we're learning about a key witness in Jack Smith's classified documents case who dropped his lawyer that the Trump super PAC was paying for, and he recanted his previous statement, instead providing new information implicating the former president and his co-defendants. According to this new court filing, Trump employee number 4, who NBC News has identified as Yuscil Taveras, changed his testimony about efforts to delete security camera footage at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. The new testimony resulted in last month's superseding indictment, tacking on 3 more counts to Trump's list of charges in Florida, as well as naming an additional co-defendant, Carlos de Oliveira. So, for more on this, I'm joined by our Justice and Intelligence correspondent, Ken Delaney. Ken, the second we saw Trump employee number 4 in that superseding indictment, we knew something was up. And how much of this is tied to the Jack Smith filing with the judge that said, hey, there's something haywire here with all these lawyers. There's too many conflicts here, and some clients may not be served well by their current counsel.
So that's why we're learning about it. And we're also learning about it because the judge in Florida, Aileen Cannon, is pressing Jack Smith to justify why he was using 2 separate grand juries. And that's where this matter arose. Because essentially, as you said, this didn't just happen. This happened in July. I'm glad you're making that point because it's getting a little bit lost today.
Right.
We knew when the superseding indictment came out, making this extraordinary charge that Donald Trump conspired to destroy surveillance footage that was under subpoena. We knew that there was a witness that had provided evidence, and that witness was employee number 4, Yuscil Taveras. What we now know is the circumstances of it was he was first represented by a lawyer paid for by Trump. The documents say he lied to the grand jury, which is a crime, but he hasn't been charged with that crime because why? He flipped, and he's testifying now on in cooperation with Jack Smith. And what's so fascinating about with a federal public defender, so an independent lawyer. And what's so fascinating about this to me is the other 2 co-defendants in this case, Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira, are in exactly the same situation. They're represented by Trump-funded lawyers, and they, according to the government, they spoke to Trump and they could provide crucial testimony about this conspiracy if they were cooperating, but right now they're not.
So they're sharing counsel with Trump, correct?
Essentially.
They're basically represented by the same lawyers, his co-defendants here, and this gets back to what Jack Smith was saying. Well, wait a minute, is one lawyer going to cross-examine a witness that we put on the stand? Are they going to, I mean, there was just whose interest does the lawyer have more of, Donald Trump or the other client?
That's right. And this really underscores the problem here. Now, it's not unethical on its face. You're allowed to...
Can the judge order new counsel?
The judge can do that. If the judge has any reason to believe that this client's interest is not being represented. I mean, we saw this with Cassidy Hutchinson, remember, during the January 6th. She had one story when she was represented by a Trump-funded lawyer who told her, remember, according to her, they don't know what you know. You don't have to remember everything so carefully. As soon as she got an independent lawyer, she told the story in full as she remembered it. It was very damaging to Trump. So we may see more of this. To me, it's bananas that Walt Nauta, Carlos de Oliveira are going to go to prison.
I know, for Donald Trump.
For Donald Trump.
All right. Well, he's pulled this off for years. He has pulled this off with the Trump Organization. Look who's sitting, look who's served time for him.
Yeah, there you go.
He's had plenty of people do it for him. Full socially. Ken Delaney, and thank you. Up next, we're going to dig deeper into the state of the race heading into tonight's debate and how the field is going to address the Trump-sized elephant in the room that won't be on the stage. Panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Ahead of tonight's debate, it is worth noting that there are persuadable Republican primary voters out there, but some candidates on stage need to do some work to get on their radar. Our new Des Moines Register NBC News Mediacom poll asked likely Republican caucus goer who their first and second choice candidates were, as well as who they were considering. And you add it all up, and Ann Selzer likes to call it the footprint, right? What is the footprint each candidate has right now in the caucus? Some of them are size small. Ahead of this first debate, just Trump and DeSantis and Scott have a footprint of over 50%. Really, Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy are the next two. Then you start to see it go down there. Joining me now on set is Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter for Politico, Faz Shakur, senior advisor to Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and Republican strategist Brad Todd. Brad, this is your side of the aisle. You don't have a front runner there tonight. You don't have a candidate in this race, but if you did, what would you what would your debate memo look like? I don't know if it would look like Ken Cuccinelli's, but what would your debate memo look like?
Well, I would say, first off, all Republican primary voters know plenty of reasons not to vote for President Trump, but they're still looking for all the qualities they like in President Trump, for the most part, with the exception of maybe a quarter. So the debate tonight is to be Trump plus, and the momentum is there for a candidate who can clear the field and prove that they give the qualities Trump has, plus without his baggage. In Iowa, maybe it's 55% that's ready for Trump plus. And so I think that's the audition tonight.
Daniela, I think we're going to find out who's going to be the best Trump defender, right? When you hear from a Chris Christie or Asa Hutchinson, I assume both DeSantis and Ramaswamy see that as almost an opportunity to potentially do that. What do we think that looks like?
Well, it's going to be a delicate balance, right, Chuck? Because they're going to have to walk this fine line of, look, I agree with his policies. I agree with what he's done when he was president in 2016. I agree with what he did. But I don't agree with certain things like, for example, his indictments. There's going to have to be a distinction they're going to have to draw. And I think that's what we don't know what it's going to look like tonight. And just specifically, how do these candidates like DeSantis go forward and draw that distinction by keeping his voters and convincing them to support him instead? I think that's going to be really, really tricky, and we still don't exactly know what that's going to look like.
You know, Faz, you were the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders when he had to get ready for the first of 2 nights of debates, 20 candidates.
Yes.
And that first debate, you know, it's funny. You know, it's like first debates matter, but you're not sure how they matter until down the road. It turned out that first debate mattered a lot. It was really definitional to the Democratic Party's identity, even though there wasn't like one moment that everybody looks back to and said, oh, that was decisive.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. And I mean, especially with the B and C team, when you're debating them, it feels like, you know, with the B and C team, when they're debating, many of them they're rustling for position. If you're a front runner with Bernie, you kind of know, I'm playing for the long haul.
Right, and he was in a comfortable place. I remember he didn't care if anybody came
And the goal is not to get dragged by the others. So, hey, stay on your lane, let them play in the sandbox. And they're playing in a different sandbox, and you're trying to figure out which ones are playing for the long haul. So I'm thinking of people like Pete Buttigieg versus Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, at some point, was a movement leader of a kind, but he was playing for social attention.
Right.
I thought Pete had a better strategy of, I'm playing for a longer haul. And I wonder in this field, you know, the policy debate here is probably to the left of Trump. Like, that's probably where the actual policy is, but I don't think anyone's going to go there. So I don't know where they're competing for.
I assume the only substantive debate we see tonight is on foreign policy. Because I think there's genuinely disagreement up there about the direction of American foreign policy.
Well, and some of them you feel like maybe making it up on the fly.
Well, I don't want to make that accusation, but in general, it certainly seems like some people have studied the issue a little bit more than others.
I do think foreign policy is a thing that certainly has some divisions on the Republican side.
Yeah.
It is more animated. Although Republicans unite when there's a definite, defined threat to the United States. It's when it's not a direct threat that Republicans get divided. I want to go back to something Danielle said, though. I think it's fool's gold to defend Trump or attack him tonight.
So you wouldn't defend him that much either?
I wouldn't defend him or attack him. I think that it's an audition to prove you can take on the Democrats and the media as effectively as they think Trump does. And as soon as you prove you're over that threshold, you have a real shot to be the alternative to Trump. There's a market for an alternative to Trump. It's just no one has been qualified yet.
I come back to DeSantis tonight because I feel like, Daniela, in some ways, look, this is a great opportunity. I know he wanted Trump on that stage. I think this is in some ways, if for some reason he's ended up the nominee, it's going to be because he got this moment. Let's see how he handles the incoming, because I think the incoming's coming. How does he handle it? And I don't know how he's going to handle it, because what we've seen of him in the limited debate performances hasn't been that great.
Well, and everyone's going to attack him. That's what we're going to see. He's the front runner right now. That's not on the stage.
Right.
And Trump is still going to take.
And he feels a little vulnerable right now.
And he feels very vulnerable right now after his debate memo. Everyone saw what the debate memo was. He said he didn't read it. He's trying to stay away from that. It's going to be tricky for him. And I think what we're going to see tonight is, yes, he's going to have a chance to not have Trump in the room and have Trump attacking him. But Trump is still going to take all the oxygen from the room. He's not there, but he's there. And even his surrogates are there. And I think that regardless of him trying to distinguish himself, he's still going to have to try to, you know, as I said earlier, walk this fine line of distinguishing himself, and it's going to be very, very difficult.
Faz, is Vivek Pete Buttigieg or Andrew Yang?
That's what I think he's trying to figure out.
Yeah,
do you want to just go
too.
for social, or
Right.
do you want to play for a strategy in which you are
You might
actually the number 2 or 3?
Yeah, you might have a shot at this.
And I bet you were looking at the numbers too, I'm sure, which was like in a Republican primary, the Republican primary voters are different than Democratic primary voters. We were always having to make an argument for Bernie. He's more aligned with your values, but we have to make the
You had to make an
electability
electability.
Yes.
Yeah, Republican primary voters, they don't have to make an electability
because you would
argument.
ordinarily say to Vivek or to
Right.
Ron DeSantis, go make an electability argument and win that. But Republican primary voters are telling you that electability isn't a major concern.
This has always been a difference, a distinguishing characteristic of Republican voters. I mean, one of the few times they went with the electable guys in their minds was McCain and Romney.
Here's the reason why it doesn't work. Because electability is an argument that geniuses in Washington make and tell the actual voters. And our voters resist being told what the geniuses
I think
in Washington
most voters resist it, but I take your point there. Yeah.
It's too definitional on the Republican side. But, there's one more opponent Ron DeSantis has, right? He has Trump, who's not there.
Mm-hmm.
He has a group of people on stage who are there. The other opponent I think he has tonight is the perception that he's being handled. That's why the debate memo is such a big problem.
Yeah.
He hates the
Great
notion
point.
that he's handled. And so you
Or that
just
somebody
watch.
else deserves credit for what he's done, too, right? The argument you've made that, hey, he gets a lot of credit for other people's work.
He has been an effective emulator. And because he's the governor of Florida, he's often given credit for things that succeeded elsewhere first.
Yeah. So, Daniela, two people we haven't mentioned here that I have no idea what their strategy is tonight is Tim Scott and Nikki Haley. But here's something to think about with Tim Scott. Apparently, he's never been involved in a debate before, like anything of consequence. Nikki Haley's had debates, but people forget he kind of got an easy path to congressional seat when Jim DeMint left it, and then he got an easy path to a Senate seat via appointment. So he's never really, and I'm told like he really took this seriously because he'd never really done this before. So I have no idea what we're going to see from him tonight.
Well, and I have no idea either, Chuck, because he doesn't talk to reporters
He
at the
hasn't talked to
Capitol.
anybody.
He hasn't talked to anybody in months, which is very... when Elizabeth Warren was about to announce her campaign, she started talking to reporters in the hallways on Capitol Hill to prepare for these moments.
For more.
And she started talking to reporters at all her campaign events. Bernie Sanders did the same thing. I mean, he's always talked to reporters, but this is what you do to prepare for these moments that you get a question that you're not ready for, and you know what to say. I don't know what he's going to say tonight, and he's kind of been allowed to be under the radar leading up to this.
Nikki Haley strikes me as being verbally nimble, and we just don't know yet with Tim Scott because he's never been in this. He doesn't put himself in this position very often.
But Tim Scott has the chance to make the most of it tonight because he's the guy that's creeping up on DeSantis in Iowa. He's just a handful of points down. And so a good night tonight. It's a caucus-going electorate. They're going to be people, kind of people who watch debates, right? Regular Americans don't watch debates. Caucus goers do. So with a good night tonight, he could find himself in second place in Iowa in 2 weeks. That would be a sea change in the race right now.
And if that happens, though, is that more of a reflection on DeSantis or a reflection of Scott?
You would know better than that.
Yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes.
In some ways, yeah.
Ron DeSantis was maybe 13 points down nationally late March. Now he's maybe 40 points down.
Hey, so Bernie's in New Hampshire this week.
Yeah.
What are we supposed to think of that, Fast?
That the progressive movement is still alive and kicking, and we got millions of people who want a bold agenda.
What is he going to keep Cornel West from running for president?
No one's going to tell Cornel West what to do. It's his decision to make. But, if Biden plays his part right, Cornel West probably doesn't do it.
Oh, interesting. Well, we'll find out what that is. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the debate tonight. I'll be back. I have an 11 p.m. Eastern special, Meet the Press special right here, breaking down the first Republican presidential debate. Don't miss it. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.